The night my daughter-in-law raised her glass and said to Dad, who finally figured out how to use the self-checkout at Walmart, the whole table laughed. My two sons laughed. My grandchildren laughed. Even the restaurant manager glanced over with a smirk I wasn't supposed to notice. I smiled. I picked up my water glass and I smiled. That was the last smile I gave any of them for free. Let me back up. My name is Warren and I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years building a commercial real estate firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. Not a boutique operation. I mean a firm with 14 employees, 3 offices, and a portfolio of industrial and retail properties spread across the Carolinas and into Tennessee. I started with nothing. My father was a machinist in Greensboro. My mother worked the register at a hardware store until her knees gave out. I paid my own way through UNC Charlotte, got my real estate license at 22, and spent the next 3 decades doing what people in my industry call grinding. Early mornings, late nights, learning how to read a deal before anyone else at the table saw it coming. I never felt the need to advertise any of this to my family. That probably sounds strange, but I grew up watching men who wore their money like a costume, always performing, always needing the room to know what they were worth. I didn't want to be that. And honestly, I didn't want my boys growing up thinking life had a safety net with my name on it. I wanted them hungry. I wanted them to build something of their own. So I drove a 6-year-old F-150. I wore jeans to church. I took my grandkids to the county fair and complained about the price of funnel cake like any normal grandfather would. At family dinners, I talked about the garden, about the hornet season, about whether the neighbor's new fence was up to code. I did not talk about the $12 million warehouse deal I'd just closed in Concord. My boys knew I worked in real estate. That's about where their knowledge ended. My older son, I'll call him my older son, married a woman I'll call my daughter-in-law, and from the very beginning she set the temperature in every room she walked into. She was not a cruel person by nature, I don't think. She was simply a person who ranked everyone she met, within 30 seconds of meeting them, filed that ranking away, and acted accordingly from that point forward. She had ranked me very early on, somewhere between harmless and irrelevant. My younger son was a different story. He was bright, genuinely bright, and he had a good heart buried under years of needing to impress people he shouldn't have cared about. He'd married a woman who was quieter, gentler. She mostly stayed out of things, but she laughed at that Walmart joke too, not cruelly, just reflexively, the way you laugh when everyone else does, and the alternative is an awkward silence at your own dinner table. That was the spring dinner. My older son's birthday, actually. We were at a steakhouse in South Charlotte, the kind of place with leather booths and a wine list printed on a board, because they update it too often to bother laminating it. My daughter-in-law had chosen it. She always chose. She liked choosing. The Walmart joke was not the first jab of the night. It was maybe the 4th or 5th, and it was the one that landed with the most applause, so that's the one I remember most clearly. Earlier there had been a comment about my truck, delivered as a compliment with just enough edge to mean the opposite. There had been a suggestion, very casual, very caring, that maybe I should think about simplifying my life now that I was getting up there. And there had been a moment, just before the entrees arrived, when my older son looked at me over the rim of his bourbon and said, "Dad, have you ever thought about moving into one of those 55-plus communities? Some of them are actually pretty nice." "I'm 64, I said. "Right, but you could get on a wait list," my daughter-in-law said. "The good ones fill up fast." I looked at her. I thought about the 11 properties I currently owned outright. I said nothing. I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was only 50 degrees. I needed the cold air. I needed to think. Here's what I thought about my grandfather, who worked at a textile mill in Burlington for 40 years and never once complained about it. My father, who smelled like metal shavings every night at dinner and never missed one. The way my mother used to say that dignity wasn't about what you had, it was about what you refused to sell. I had spent my entire adult life refusing to sell my dignity for anyone's approval, and somehow, at 64, I had raised 2 sons who were politely, cheerfully, over a 12-ounce ribeye, trying to purchase mine at a discount. I started paying closer attention after that. I hadn't been inattentive before, but there's a difference between noticing and watching. I started watching. I started listening to the conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. I paid attention to the way my daughter-in-law spoke to my younger son's wife when she thought I couldn't hear. The gentle corrections, the little redirections, the way she'd established herself as the authority on what our family was and where it was going. And gradually, over the next few months, I began to understand what they were building toward. My house came up in conversation more than once. It's a 4-bedroom on a half-acre in a part of Myers Park that had appreciated considerably since I bought it in 1998. I had never told my sons what I paid for it, or what it was worth now. But real estate listings are public, and people in Charlotte talk, and I suspect my daughter-in-law had done her homework. One Sunday in July, my older son called me and said he wanted to come over and talk about some things. He sat at my kitchen table with his hands folded in front of him like he was chairing a meeting he'd rehearsed, and he told me with genuine tenderness in his voice that he and his wife had been thinking a lot about my future. "We love you, Dad," he said, "and we want you to be taken care of." "I'm taken care of," I said. "You're alone in a 4-bedroom house," he said. "That's a lot of maintenance for one person." I asked him what he had in mind. He had a folder. My daughter-in-law had made him a folder. It had printed pages from 3 continuing care retirement communities within 40 miles of Charlotte. Not the nice ones, or rather, not the nicest ones. The ones with the lowest monthly fees. One of them was in Kannapolis. The entry fee alone would have consumed most of what a person of my apparent means could be expected to have saved. "Something to think about," he said, sliding the folder across the table. I looked at the folder for a long moment. "I'll think about it," I said. He looked relieved. He had expected resistance. The absence of it seemed to confirm something for him, that I was, as advertised, manageable. 2 weeks later, my younger son came by with essentially the same conversation, slightly different packaging. His wife was not with him. He seemed a little uncomfortable, like a man who had been assigned a task he wasn't fully convinced was right, but had decided to carry out anyway because the alternative was going home, and explaining why he hadn't. I asked him directly, "Is this your idea or your brother's?" He looked at the floor. "We've all been talking," he said. "All of you," I said. "We care about you. I know you do." After he left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The house was quiet. The late afternoon light was coming through the window above the sink, the way it does in August in the Carolinas, thick and golden and unhurried. I'd watched that light come through that window for 26 years. My wife had stood at that sink. My boys had eaten cereal at that table when they were small enough that their feet didn't reach the floor. I did not feel angry exactly. I felt something older and quieter than anger. I felt the particular sadness of a man who has tried to raise his sons to be something and is sitting alone in the evidence that he may have miscalculated somewhere. But I also felt something else. Something my father would have recognized. A kind of cold clarity that arrives when a situation has finally shown you exactly what it is. I called my attorney the following Monday morning. Her name is Patricia Okafor, and she has handled my business affairs for 11 years, and she is one of the sharpest people I have ever sat across a table from. I told her I wanted to update my estate documents. I told her I was thinking about restructuring the ownership of several properties. I told her I needed everything airtight, and I needed it done quietly. She did not ask unnecessary questions. That's why I've kept her for 11 years. Over the next 6 weeks, I made a series of moves that I will not detail here in their entirety, because some of them are still in effect, and some of them involve people I still care about. What I will tell you is this. When you spend 30 years in commercial real estate, you learn that the most important transactions are the ones nobody sees coming. The deal that looks dead is the one about to close. The asset that looks worthless is the one worth protecting. I protected what needed protecting. I moved what needed moving. And I waited. Thanksgiving that year was at my older son's house in Ballantyne. My daughter-in-law had done the decorating cloth napkins, a centerpiece that probably cost more than my first car payment, a seating chart that placed me at the far end of the table next to my younger son's father-in-law, a man I've always liked and who, I suspected, had no idea what was quietly happening in the family he'd married his daughter into. Dinner was good. The conversation was pleasant. My daughter-in-law was warm to me in the way that people are warm to someone they've already filed away. Not cruel, not dismissive, just warm the way a person is warm to a problem they believe they've already solved. After dessert, while the women were in the kitchen and my younger son had taken the grandchildren out back to throw a football around, my older son refilled my coffee and sat down next to me and said very quietly, "Dad, we found a place in Concord. It's really nice. We'd like to take you to see it this weekend." I looked at him for a moment. My oldest boy. I remembered carrying him on my shoulders at Panthers games when he was 7 years old. I remembered teaching him to drive in the parking lot of an empty grocery store on a Sunday morning. I remembered the look on his face at his college graduation, that mix of pride and relief, and something like wonder at the fact that he'd actually done it. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay." "Make the appointment," I said. "I'll go see it." He reached over and squeezed my arm. "We just want what's best for you, Dad." I nodded. I looked at my coffee. I said, "I know you do." I visited the facility in Concord on a Saturday morning in November with both of my sons and my daughter-in-law. It was a clean place, well-run, friendly staff. Not terrible, not what I'd choose. The monthly fee was $2,800, which my son seemed to consider very reasonable, and I considered beside the point. The marketing coordinator walked us through a 2-bedroom unit with a small balcony overlooking a courtyard. My daughter-in-law asked questions about the meal program. My older son asked about the security system. My younger son stood near the window and didn't say much. I asked about the lease structure. I asked about what happened to your unit fee if you passed away in the first year. I asked about the property management company that held the contract for the facility. The marketing coordinator gave me a slightly puzzled look. "Most families ask about the social activities," she said. "I'm sure the social activities are fine," I said. On the way home, my daughter-in-law said from the back seat, "What did you think, Warren?" "I think it's a well-run facility," I said. "We could get you on the list," she said. "There's usually a wait." "Let me look at my calendar," I said. She smiled. My older son caught my eye in the rearview mirror and gave me a small nod, like a man confirming that the hard part was over. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I met with Patricia again. We finalized the last of the documents. We went through everything twice. She asked me once if I was certain, and I told her I was, and she said, "All right then," and that was that. I also made 2 phone calls that week. The first was to my older son's employer, a regional logistics company where he'd worked as an operations manager for 6 years. I did not own that company. I did have a significant relationship with their largest landlord, whose portfolio I helped manage. I made no threats. I made no requests. I simply mentioned in the course of a routine conversation that I'd heard good things about a competitor and asked whether their current operational structure left them room to grow. That was all I needed to do. I'm not proud of that call. I'm not sure it was the right thing, but I made it. The second call was to my own company's HR director. My younger son had worked for me for 4 years in a mid-level property management role I'd created partly out of genuine need and partly because he'd asked and I hadn't known how to say no without breaking something between us. He was adequate at the job. He was not excellent. I'd been carrying him a little and we both knew it, even if we never said so. I told my HR director to process his termination before the end of the month with 4 months severance, a strong reference letter, and no public explanation beyond a company restructuring. I wanted him to land on his feet. I just didn't want to be the one holding the net anymore. On the first Friday in December, I invited both of my sons to lunch. Just us, no spouses, no grandchildren. A seafood place I like near uptown Charlotte. We ordered and made small talk for a while, and then I put my fork down and I told them something I had never told anyone outside of my attorney and my accountant. I told them what I was worth, not approximately, exactly, or close enough to exactly that the distinction didn't matter. My older son put down his sweet tea. My younger son stopped chewing. I told them about the portfolio. I told them about the firm. I told them about the 3 investment accounts and the 2 properties in Tennessee and the warehouse in Concord that I had just released at a rate that would probably make the business press if anyone was paying attention to small market industrial real estate deals in the eastern Piedmont. I told them that I had spent their entire childhood driving old trucks and shopping at regular grocery stores and never talking about money because I didn't want them to become the kind of men who thought it entitled them to anything. I looked at my older son. Your employer is a tenant in a building I help manage, I said. I have never once used that relationship to benefit you. I want you to know that. I looked at my younger son. You're a good man, I said. You are, but you've been working for me and neither of us has been honest about how that's been going. That ends at the end of the month. You'll have everything you need to find something better. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Finally, my older son said, Dad, we didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. That was the point. The retirement community, he started. Was not going to happen, I said, but I appreciated the folder. My younger son put his face in his hands, not in shame exactly, or not only in shame, in something more complicated than that. He said, I should have said something. I knew something was off. I should have said something. You should have, I said. But you didn't, so here we are. I paid the check. We walked out into the December afternoon, the 3 of us, and we stood on the sidewalk for a moment without speaking. Traffic moved on Tryon Street. Somewhere nearby, someone was selling hot dogs from a cart. A normal Friday afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina. My older son said, What happens now? I said, That depends on you. I drove home alone. I let the quiet settle around me the way it does in that house in the late afternoon, that thick golden light through the window above the sink. I thought about my wife, who had been gone for 9 years now. I thought about what she would have said about all of it, and I knew, with the particular certainty that comes from 34 years of marriage, that she would have told me I handled it the wrong way. She would have wanted me to talk to them. She would have believed in the conversation over the lesson. She was probably right. She usually was, but I also think she would have understood that I had tried the conversation, in every way I knew how, for years, in the way I lived, in the way I worked, in everything I tried to show them about what a man owed to himself and to the people who depended on him, and they hadn't been paying attention, so I taught a different way, and I have to live with that. My younger son called me that same evening. We talked for almost 2 hours. We talked about his mother. We talked about his mother. We talked about what he wanted his life to look like. We talked about things we had not talked about in years, maybe ever. At the end of the call, he said, I'm sorry, Dad. I really am. And I believed him because I know my son and I know the difference between the apology that's trying to get something back and the apology that has already let go of what it lost. My older son took longer. His wife took longer still. And honestly, we are still finding our way with each other, her and I. Some rooms take more time to air out than others. What I will tell you is that the folder she made, the one with the 3 retirement communities printed out in 12-point font, all those highlighted amenity packages and monthly fee schedules, I kept it. It's in the drawer of my desk at home, under some old tax documents. Every few months I come across it by accident, and I pick it up and I think about that dinner in the spring, the Walmart joke, the sound of my family laughing, and I think about something a man I used to work with said to me a long time ago, back when I was 27 and didn't know very much yet. He said, Warren, never confuse what a person sees with what they know. The ones who underestimate you are giving you a gift. Take it. I took it. I'm 64 years old. I drive a new truck now, not because I need anyone to see it, but because I've earned it and I like the way it handles on the highway. I still go to the county fair with my grandchildren. I still complain about funnel cake prices. Some things don't need to change, but some things do. And the thing I've learned, the thing I would tell any man sitting in the same kitchen I sat in on that August afternoon watching that light come through that window, is this: you do not owe your silence to people who have mistaken it for weakness. You do not owe forgiveness on a timeline that serves someone else's comfort, and you do not owe anyone a performance of your own smallness, just because they have decided, for their own reasons, that small is what you are. They were wrong about what I was, and I made sure they knew it. What happens next is still being written. That part, I think, is the point.